Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. Welcome to day 3 of the Zambian Virtual Conservation Careers Fair. In this session, we're speaking to someone who personally excites me because she's talking about bats. And in the session, we're going to understand bats better. Her name is Helen Taylor Boyd, and she's a research conservation officer working with Bats Without Borders. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks so much, Mina. It's great to be here. And it's great to be talking about bats because that is my particular interest. I do class myself as an overall ecologist, which I will explain in a second. But like I said, my passion at the moment is definitely bats. So just to give you a brief idea about what an ecologist does, ecologist is a person who studies how plants and animals interact with each other and also with their environment. Apparently the word comes from a Greek word house, and I love this. Basically, we study the environment like it's a big house, and we study the living organisms within that as if they're roommates, basically. And we like to branch out into all sorts of areas of work. I personally have 3 areas of work. One is my academic side of things. I do a lot of academic research, and I'm involved in, I actually am doing a PhD on bats in agricultural landscapes through the University of Stirling in Scotland at the moment. I also, as you mentioned, Mina, I work with Bats Without Borders as research and conservation officer. Bats Without Borders is an organization that supports projects on bats throughout the whole of Southern Africa, and we're building a presence here in Zambia as well. I also am involved in the commercial aspect of being an ecologist. That is basically being involved in impact assessments, feasibility studies, and such like for development projects. Just to give you an idea of my background and how I got interested in a career in ecology, basically my family played a huge role in my interest in nature, my interest in the environment. My parents were constantly taking my sister and I out on trips into remote areas where they worked. And this all stemmed from their parents. My paternal grandfather, unfortunately, I didn't know for very long. He was only 3 months when he left us, but he passed on his passion for fishing in remote places around Zambia to my father, who is to this day is obsessed with fishing. My maternal grandfather, Clive Kelly, was a teacher in Chipata for many years, and him and my grandmother eventually started to run bush camps in South Luangwa because of their interest in being amateur naturalists, basically, and they developed their careers as guides and camp managers. From my family's interest, I also gained interest through my school years. I went to school in Northwestern Province, very remote location, and also in Chengelo, which many of you will know is near Makushi. So quite remote locations. From that, I was quite lucky to be able to study in the UK, which gave me a much more international outlook on ecology and conservation. I started off with a zoology degree in University of Birmingham, moved on to a master's in conservation biology. I was actually very interested in birds for a very long time, and actually I probably would have done a PhD on birds. However, I was converted to the dark side. Some of you listening may know that in the UK there's a big following of bats. There is a voluntary bat group in almost every county. And I joined one of these and became very interested in bats, realized that there wasn't much done on bats in Zambia. And so I developed my PhD around that topic. So some of you will be wondering, why bats? Why not elephants? Why not lions? You know, that's so exciting. Well, what I find really exciting about bats is the huge diversity that we have here in Zambia. We've got at least 75 species, more likely to be between 80, 90 species in Zambia, all different shapes, sizes, ecological roles to play. Very, very interesting, and very little been done on bats in our country. What you will note when you look at IUCN Red List is that the vast majority of our bat species are classed as least concern, but population trend unknown. And that means obviously it's very difficult to make accurate trend assessments if you don't actually have the data to base it on. So many of those least concern may be of concern. There's very few that are classed as near threatened, and we are probably underestimating that number. Another aspect of looking at bat conservation is not just how many species you have in a particular area, not just the huge populations in some areas. The bats which may be particularly common in some habitats may be important for those particular habitats. And this paper, written by Rachel Cooper-Bohannon, who runs Bats Without Borders, highlights the need for us to take into account those species that may be endemic, may have restricted distributions, found in areas where there is actually low species richness. And so those areas are not of particular interest to a lot of scientists because there's not as many different species to look at. So another aspect is the importance of how they are very resistant to disease. Now, this is a blanket statement because obviously different bats may react differently in different situations. But overall, most bats are particularly resistant to disease. That makes it very important as a topic for zoonotic transfer of disease, a very current topic. But it's also important for the solution to that. Why are they so resistant? Maybe they are the secret. Maybe they are going to help us to understand how we can cope better with disease outbreaks. They're also very important for ecosystem services. Fruit bats are very important for seed dispersal. Insectivorous bats are very important as predators of insects. Of course, there's also the threats to take into account when we look at bats and understanding their conservation status. For me, these are all very important aspects, but I also think they're very cute and fluffy. So I think they're very important for that reason. Now, obviously, we have this huge issue at the moment here in Zambia of habitat loss. There is that public perception that charcoal is to blame for all of our deforestation problems. Shifting agriculture is causing such a big issue. We forget to take into account the legal activities and what we would call the productive activities that are causing deforestation. This may be logging for production or export of wood, illegal or legal. All of these are important deforestation drivers that we need to consider. And it's not just obviously impacting bats and how their distributions are impacted, but also obviously a whole host of many other species. Bats are particularly susceptible to persecution. Many of you out there will be thinking, oh my goodness, why bats? I am so scared of bats. They fly around, they get in your hair, they're so scary. They are actually amazing creatures, just like any other mammal. They have characters that are very similar to, let's say, if you had a dog or a cat, but they are a wild animal and they act like a wild animal. So of course, if you're going to pick it up, it's going to bite you. So obviously I wouldn't advise you to keep one as a pet. However, those fears about bats come from all of these myths, these stories, Dracula stories, traditional myths, and people tend to have phobias against bats. They are usually unfounded and something that we need to address in terms of outreach and education, building up a knowledge base about bats. And I think that is a particularly important approach in our work. So I started up this Bats in Zambia project as a way to mobilize everybody working on bats within the country, or any historical records, historical work, and look at how we could go forward and build up that important information about this important group of mammals, and use that information to improve conservation approaches and improve people's knowledge bases. Bats Without Borders has been instrumental in building up this project, and basically the aims of Bats Without Borders is totally in line with the project ideas that we had in mind when we first started. And the focus is on applied research that improves conservation action. And as I mentioned before, outreach activities to help people to understand what bats are all about, and building up local capacity. This project is very much a locally driven project. It involves a lot of collaborations. Now, these are just some of the people that we work with. It's something that everybody in a conservation career needs to take into account. There is a lot of people out there who are working on similar topics. They may even be on completely different topics, but may have something to contribute to the work that you are doing. So it's very, very important to have a collaborative approach. In our case, the people who are custodians of the habitats that many species of bat are living in, for example, Kasanka National Park, the cave areas. Here's Adam Golding, who worked on cave exploration in Zambia for many years. There's also obviously the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, who are the ones who are involved in protecting the bat species. Bats are classed as wildlife. That means that they are under their jurisdiction and are legally protected in the same way as any other animal under their jurisdiction. Livingston Museum holds a lot of historical records and does some current work as well. And then of course there's the universities such as University of Zambia, who works with Hokkaido University looking at disease surveillance as well. Copperbelt University as well does some work. So all of these different stakeholders in bat research and conservation are important to work with. As I mentioned before, education is a huge part of the work that we do here in Zambia. From the very small rural schools in the middle of nowhere to the people who are watching us when we're doing our research, all the way up to the very well-qualified people at universities and environment management agency. All of those people are very interested in how bats apply to not only their daily lives, but maybe their work roles or future work roles as well. Another aspect of our work is home visits. There are a lot of people out there, I'm sure, who will be listening now who have either in the past had bats living in their houses or currently have bats living in their houses. It's not so exciting to see bats when they're maybe damaging your ceiling boards or something. And I totally understand that. So basically, we have a very humane approach to removing bats or excluding them, should I say, from roofs, but providing them with an alternative accommodation through bat boxes. Here's my assistant working with my husband, who is learning carpentry skills. So I think it was Chanda mentioned earlier in the series that you get all sorts of skills through conservation. There was also the lady from ZSL as well. I think she mentioned that as well. But you can get a wide range of skills through working in conservation. And this is just an aspect of our work that you wouldn't really think of. We also obviously not only do education programs, we do outreach programs, training programs as well. We're running workshops and also training individuals as field assistants as well. I mentioned Bernard, my research assistant there, doing some training. Something that we're going into is building up citizen science work. I'm sure that many of you know that this will be probably a more up and coming area of research in tapping into the general public's knowledge. There are many amateur naturalists out there who are more than capable of taking a photograph of something very interesting and getting a professional opinion on an identification or a population number. When you look at this project, this is AfriBats on iNaturalist. We only have 157 observations of bats that have been confirmed by others on the program, and only 37 species. So there's a lot more potential for people to contribute records from the general public and improve survey effort as well. So it's not just the very few of us who are interested in bats who are contributing to this area of science. We do a lot of our own research as well. So we are currently focusing on the main habitats that are of conservation concern. One obviously is the woodland areas due to the deforestation issue, and the other area is caves. Caves are particularly vulnerable to persecution because a lot of bats who live in caves are in large numbers and can be killed or affected or disturbed in some way very quickly in large numbers. My particular area of study is bats and agriculture. As I mentioned, for my PhD, I'm very interested in how bats are eating insects and crop pests, and may actually help with control of these pests, as they do in other areas around the world. Studies have been done in America, for example, that show that they save billions of dollars on crop protection through pesticides. I'm also interested in how humans are impacting the bats in terms of large commercial farming as well. Does it affect species distribution? Does it affect their activity and their populations? Also, bats can be indicator species. So an indicator species is something that tells us more about the health of a habitat. Because of the wide range of species that we have and the variety of niches that they occupy, we can apply the knowledge of what species are present in particular habitats to understanding how healthy that habitat may be. So my research questions are, do bats are they influenced by the crop type on commercial farms? Are they influenced more by habitat variables, structure of habitat rather than just crop? And also, are they actually eating the crop pests? So we're looking at doing dietary analysis to understand what they're actually consuming. I've been extremely privileged to also be involved in policy and development projects. The more recent issue that we have in Zambia is the potential for wind farms in the country. There are a few potential projects that are coming up, which is great for providing some green energy, but also they do potentially have the big impact on birds and bats. So it's important that we put those projects in the right places, that they have minimal impact on those particular species that may be susceptible. So I've been very privileged to work with people on the front line of this, Zima, who are reviewing impact assessments, for example, so that they can understand more about how these types of projects can influence bat populations as well as other species. So overall, from my limited career, because I feel I've still got a long way to go, from looking at the people who've gone before me, these are the sorts of things that I've come up with that have I've highlighted that have been important for me. People who've come before me have been extremely passionate about what they do. It's very important in this type of conservation career when you're up against so many difficulties that you are passionate about what you do. It's also very important to keep up to date with the latest research, things on taxonomy, but also on what people are doing around the world. We've got lots to learn from other people around the world. It's important to have an impact at all levels. You know, you can't just stay in a little bubble and influence the people around you in your daily routine. Obviously, that's very important, but there's also those people, let's say in rural areas, who have very little access to education. There's the people who are working in other areas than yourself. So for example, in our case, we work with virologists, which is a relatively different topic to ours, but has an overlap in understanding movements of bats and how viruses may be spread as well. It's important that you collaborate with as many people as possible, and this is obviously a linked topic here, but it's important to learn from each other and to work with each other. We're all in it for the same goal, so it's important that we all work together. So this is just a little list of the types of people that I've been working with and who have supported the projects that we've been working on. I would like to highlight the fantastic support from landowners who have allowed us access to their areas, and safari and conservation organizations and schools, education centers and such like. Very, very helpful in getting this project going. So thank you so much. Basically, thank you to the audience who I realize you would have tuned in and would have got this talk a little bit late, but I'm more than happy to answer questions later in the chats on Facebook. I would like to acknowledge all of the people who have contributed photos to the project. A lot of people who have come to visit as volunteers. These are just some of the photos of the many people who have visited from all over the world, including obviously locally here in Zambia, who have volunteered their time for free to be involved in the project. And again, I cannot take credit for the beautiful photos that have been taken, but yeah, thank you to everybody who's been involved in the project. And thank you everyone for listening to today's talk.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Helen. These are very beautiful pictures. And thank you so much for sharing your work with us. This has been very insightful. I thought you were going to give us a bit of information about bats, but I ended up learning a lot more than I thought I would, which is very good. We've unfortunately run out of time, so I would just ask you one question, which is very obvious, in line with our theme this year. COVID has changed a lot of things as we have known them. So, how, in a few words, has your work changed because of the pandemic, and how have you adapted to this?
I have to say that we've been very lucky as ecologists because we can go out into the field in a non-invasive way to study bats still. So there are ways that we can understand bat activity using echolocation, call recording, that has allowed us to be able to go to remote places where we're not in contact with many other people during this COVID epidemic. That means that we can still continue with some aspects of our work.
Okay.
I will say, just with a few more words, is that we are very aware that we need to protect the bats, so that the research that we do often involves handling the bats to identify and to take records of morphometric measurements.
Okay.
And handle bats, we have the potential to actually pass on COVID-19 to a bat. And this is something that we are very aware of and very careful of if we are going into the field to do those types of activities. So although some of our work has been affected in that respect, we also are still able to continue some work using acoustic techniques.
Okay, once again, thank you so much for making time to talk to us about bats. I know a lot of us have a better understanding of them, and now we bagged our reasons why we should be concerned. Thank you so much for making the time again, and we will be sure to get questions from the audience and forward them to you later on.
Wonderful, thank you.
Bye-bye.